He grabbed her wrist, dumped his coffee on the floor, and screamed that she was worthless trash who'd die serving tables. The entire restaurant watched in horror. But when those glass doors opened and the billionaire walked straight to her, his face went white. Too late, buddy, way too late. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of instant karma, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Trust me, you need to stick around until the very end. The final moment will give you chills. Now, let's get into it. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Jessica Walsh pushed through the employee entrance of the corner bistro, 5:45 in the morning, just like every other day for the past 3 years. Her shoes were worn but clean, her uniform pressed despite the frayed edges on the sleeves, and her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail that would survive the chaos of the breakfast rush. She didn't need to be there that early. Her shift didn't start until 6:15. But Jessica liked those 30 quiet minutes before the world demanded anything from her. Before the orders started flying and the coffee machine began its constant hissing and the smell of bacon grease filled every corner of the small restaurant. In those moments, wiping down tables that were already clean and refilling salt shakers that were already full, she could just breathe. "You're here early again," Ruth said from behind the counter. The manager was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and permanent worry lines across her forehead. She'd been running the corner bistro for almost 2 decades, and she'd seen hundreds of servers come and go. But Jessica was different. Ruth knew it from day one, even if she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Jessica smiled as she tied her apron. "I like the quiet." What Ruth didn't know, what nobody at the corner bistro knew, was that Jessica Walsh didn't need this job. Not in the way they thought. Not in any financial sense, but she needed it in other ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with who she was determined to remain. By 7 o'clock, the breakfast crowd had started trickling in. Construction workers grabbing coffee and paper cups before heading to job sites. Office workers picking up mobile orders with one hand while checking their phones with the other. Elderly regulars who'd been coming to the same booth for years, ordering the same breakfast special without looking at the menu. Jessica moved between the tables like she'd been doing it her whole life, which in some ways she had. She'd worked her way through college waiting tables, met her husband in a coffee shop between her evening shift and her morning classes. Never forgot where she came from, even when her life changed in ways she never could have imagined. "More coffee, Mr. Patterson?" she asked the contractor in booth 7, already tilting the pot before he nodded. "You read my mind, Jessica. You always do." She'd learned everyone's names within the first month, remembered their usual orders, their kids' names, which customers liked to chat, and which ones preferred to eat in peace. It wasn't part of the job description, but it's what made her good at what she did. It's what made her human. The morning rolled on smoothly until 9:30, when the bell above the door chimed and Bradley Cunningham walked in. You could feel the shift in atmosphere immediately, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. He was the kind of man who wore his expensive suit like armor and his Rolex like a weapon. Mid-40s, perfectly groomed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no and never facing real consequences. He didn't wait for the hostess, just walked directly to a table in the center of the restaurant, pulled out his phone, and sat down without acknowledging anyone. Jessica noticed him from across the room and felt that familiar tightening in her chest. She'd dealt with customers like this before. They weren't rare, men who thought the world existed to serve them, who treated service workers like furniture that occasionally spoke. "That's your section," Ruth said quietly, apologetically. She'd seen the look on Jessica's face. "I've got it," Jessica replied, squaring her shoulders. She grabbed a menu and walked over with that same professional smile she'd perfected over years of practice. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Corner Bistro. Can I start you with some coffee?" Bradley didn't look up from his phone, just held up one finger in a wait gesture that made Jessica's jaw tighten. She stood there, patient, while he finished typing something that was apparently more important than basic courtesy. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. "Coffee," he finally said, still not making eye contact. "Black. Make sure it's actually hot this time. Last place I went to served me lukewarm garbage." "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." Jessica walked to the coffee station, poured a fresh cup from the pot that had been brewing for less than 10 minutes, and returned to his table. The coffee was hot. She knew it was hot because steam was visibly rising from the cup. Bradley took one sip and made a face like she'd just served him poison. This is burnt. It wasn't burnt. Jessica had made thousands of pots of coffee in her life. She knew what burnt coffee tasted like. But she also knew that arguing with customers like Bradley Cunningham never ended well. "I apologize, sir. I'll brew a fresh pot immediately." "No," Bradley said sharply. "I don't have time to wait for you to figure out how to make coffee. Just bring me a cappuccino, a proper one, and I want to order food." Jessica pulled out her notepad, pen ready. Bradley rattled off his order without once looking at her face. "Eggs Benedict, but substitute the Canadian bacon for prosciutto. Hash browns, but make sure they're crispy, not soggy. Whole wheat toast dry, cut diagonally. Orange juice, fresh squeezed, no pulp." "I'll get that in for you right away, sir." 20 minutes later, Jessica brought his food to the table. She'd watched the kitchen prepare it herself, everything exactly as he'd ordered. The eggs cooked perfectly. The prosciutto, thin and crispy, the hash browns, golden brown. She set the plate down carefully, along with his fresh squeezed orange juice. Bradley looked at the plate like she'd just dumped trash in front of him. "This isn't what I ordered." Jessica blinked. "Sir, I made sure everything was exactly as you requested. The eggs Benedict with prosciutto, crispy hash browns." "The eggs are overcooked," he interrupted. "I wanted them runny." "Did I say I wanted them runny? Because I'm pretty sure I wanted them runny." He hadn't said that. Jessica had the order written in her notepad, but she kept her voice calm, professional. "I apologize for the confusion, sir. I'll have the kitchen remake it immediately. How would you like the eggs prepared?" "Runny, like I originally said." He pushed the plate toward her with enough force that the silverware clattered against the ceramic. Jessica took the plate back to the kitchen. The cook, a guy named Frank who'd been working there longer than Jessica had been alive, looked at the returned food and shook his head. "Nothing wrong with those eggs," he muttered. "I know, Frank. Just make them runnier this time." The second plate came out 12 minutes later. Jessica set it down gently, her smile starting to strain at the edges. Bradley cut into the eggs, watched the yolk run onto the plate, and immediately called her back. "These are too runny. Now they're undercooked." "What kind of place is this?" Something in Jessica's chest went cold. She'd been doing this long enough to recognize what was happening. This wasn't about the food, this was about power, about a man who needed to feel superior by making someone else feel small. "Sir, I'd be happy to have the kitchen adjust them again, but perhaps you could let me know exactly how you'd like. Perhaps you could just do your job competently." Bradley's voice rose enough that nearby tables started to notice. "Is that too much to ask? Or is making a simple breakfast beyond your capabilities?" Jessica felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward them. Her face flushed, but she kept her composure. "I'll speak with the chef personally and make sure we get it exactly right this time." The third plate came out 15 minutes later. The eggs were cooked medium, a compromise between runny and firm. Jessica set it down without a word, hoping that maybe, finally, this would be acceptable. Bradley didn't even cut into them, just looked at the plate and laughed, actually laughed, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "You know what? Forget it. This is pathetic." He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone wince. Then, deliberately, with his eyes locked on Jessica's face, he picked up his coffee cup and poured it onto the floor. The dark liquid splashed across the tile, spreading in a pool near Jessica's worn shoes. The restaurant went silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. "Oops," Bradley said with a smile that had nothing warm in it. "Looks like you've got more work to do. But then again, that's all you're good for, isn't it?" Jessica stood there, frozen, as the coffee soaked toward her shoes. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, but her face remained carefully neutral. She'd learned a long time ago not to give people like this the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I'll get something to clean that up, sir." "Oh, you'll get something to clean it up?" Bradley mimicked her voice in a high-pitched, mocking tone. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Just clean it up and smile and hope someone tips you enough quarters to make rent this month?" He stood up then, towering over her, and that's when things escalated beyond anything Jessica had experienced before. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers tight enough to hurt, and pulled her closer. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he hissed. "You are worthless, you understand that? Worthless trash who's going to die serving tables in dumps like this because you don't have the brains or the talent to do anything else with your pathetic life. Jessica tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip tightened. Around them, other customers had stopped eating entirely. Some were reaching for their phones, starting to record. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. "Let go of me," Jessica said quietly, firmly. "Or what?" Bradley laughed again. "You'll call your manager? You'll have me kicked out? You think anyone cares about some nobody waitress?" That's when Ruth rushed over, her face pale. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You're going to ask me to leave?" Bradley released Jessica's wrist and turned his fury on the manager. "Your employee is incompetent, your food is garbage, and you're going to ask me to leave. Do you know who I am?" "Sir, I don't care who you are. You can't treat my staff." "I'll treat your staff however I want." Bradley was shouting now, his face red with rage. "This is what happens when you hire people with no skills, no education, no future. This girl is a failure, a complete failure, and you're defending her?" He reached into his wallet, pulled out several $20 bills, and threw them at Jessica's feet. The bills fluttered down, landing in the spilled coffee. "There. There's your charity. That's all people like you are good for, taking handouts and scraping by." He looked around at the other diners, many of whom had their phones out now, recording every second. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. This is what happens when you don't apply yourself, when you settle for mediocrity. You end up serving coffee to your betters for the rest of your miserable life." Jessica's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She stood there, straight-backed, dignified despite everything, and said nothing. What was there to say? She'd learned long ago that people like Bradley Cunningham couldn't be reasoned with. They could only be endured. That's when the bell above the door chimed again. The sound was soft, barely audible over Bradley's ranting, but something about it made the entire restaurant shift its attention. An older man stepped through the entrance, distinguished and understated in a well-tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He had silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of presence that made you stand up straighter without quite knowing why. William Hartford was 78 years old and worth approximately $8 billion. He'd built his fortune from nothing, starting with a single manufacturing plant and expanding into one of the largest industrial corporations in the country. He'd been featured in Forbes, interviewed by financial news networks, and photographed shaking hands with presidents. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he'd stopped by the corner bistro to surprise his daughter-in-law with breakfast before her shift ended, something he tried to do once a month. What mattered was that he was watching a man berate and humiliate the woman his son had married, the woman who'd taught his grandchildren to ride bikes and read bedtime stories in funny voices, the woman who'd insisted on keeping her job at this restaurant despite his son's protests because she never wanted to forget where she came from. William's expression went from pleasant to absolutely glacial in the span of a heartbeat. He walked across the restaurant with measured, deliberate steps. The crowd parted instinctively. Bradley was still ranting, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, too caught up in his own righteousness to notice the older man approaching. "And another thing," Bradley was saying when William's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Excuse me." The words were quiet, controlled, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that came from decades of boardroom negotiations and high-stakes decisions. Bradley turned, annoyed at being interrupted, and found himself face to face with William Hartford. For a second, Bradley just blinked, confused. Then recognition dawned across his features like a slow-motion car crash. His face went from red with anger to white with shock. "Mr. Hartford?" he stammered. "William Hartford?" William didn't acknowledge the question. His eyes moved past Bradley to Jessica, who was still standing there with coffee-soaked bills at her feet and red marks on her wrist where Bradley had grabbed her. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" William asked gently. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Bradley's confusion was almost comical as he looked between William and Jessica, trying to piece together what was happening. You know this waitress?" Bradley asked, his voice climbing an octave. William's gaze returned to Bradley, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "This waitress is Jessica Hartford Walsh. My daughter-in-law, mother of my two grandchildren, and one of the finest people I've ever had the privilege to know. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet 3 blocks away. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around them, phones were definitely recording now. This was the kind of moment that would be on social media within the hour, viral by dinner time. I didn't, if I had known. Bradley started backing up, his expensive shoes squelching in the spilled coffee. If you had known what? William interrupted, his voice still quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. If you'd known she was connected to someone wealthy, you would have treated her with respect, that's what you're saying? No, I just meant, because from where I'm standing, what you meant is very clear. You believe that a person's worth is determined by their job title or their bank account. You believe that service workers are beneath you, undeserving of basic human dignity. William took a step closer. You're Bradley Cunningham, aren't you? Cunningham Financial Consulting. Bradley nodded, his face now completely drained of color. Your firm submitted a bid last month for the Hartford Industries consulting contract, $50 million over 3 years. William paused, letting that sink in. Congratulations, Mr. Cunningham. You just lost it. Wait, please. Bradley's voice cracked. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of... Yes, you did. William's words were final. You meant every word. The only thing you're sorry about is that there were consequences. He glanced around at the phones recording everything. And I suspect the consequences are only beginning. Bradley tried one more time, desperation making his voice high and thin. Please, Mr. Hartford. I have a family, a business. This will ruin me. You should have thought about that before you grabbed my daughter-in-law's wrist and told her she was worthless trash. William turned away from Bradley, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd ceased to exist. Ruth, I believe you were asking this gentleman to leave? Ruth, who'd been standing frozen in shock, snapped back to attention. Yes, I was. Sir, you need to go, now. Bradley looked around the restaurant one last time, seeing nothing but contempt in the faces staring back at him. He bent down, trying to gather the money he'd thrown on the floor, but William's voice stopped him. Leave it. Consider it a tip for the emotional distress you've caused. I'm sure it doesn't begin to cover it, but it's a start. Bradley straightened up, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked toward the door. As he passed, William added one final thought. Character, Mr. Cunningham, is how you treat people who can do absolutely nothing for you. You failed that test spectacularly. The door closed behind Bradley with a soft chime that felt like the end of a chapter. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, one customer started clapping. Then another. Then the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Jessica stood there, overwhelmed, as William pulled her into a gentle hug. You okay, honey? She nodded against his shoulder, finally letting a few tears fall now that it was safe. I'm okay. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. William pulled back, looking at her seriously. Nobody treats my family that way. But more importantly, nobody should treat anyone that way. Ruth approached cautiously. Jessica, I am so sorry. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have... You did step in, Jessica said kindly. It's not your fault. I had no idea you were... Ruth trailed off, gesturing vaguely at William. Jessica smiled through her tears. That was kind of the point. I wanted to be treated like everyone else. To earn respect through my work, not my last name. An older customer, a regular named George, who'd been coming to the corner bistro for 15 years, approached their table. Ma'am, I just want to say, I've watched you work here for 3 years now. Kindest server we've ever had. Didn't need to know your last name to know you were quality people. William didn't acknowledge the question. His eyes moved past Bradley to Jessica, who was still standing. Others chimed in with similar sentiments. The young mother whose toddler Jessica always brought extra napkins for. The college student Jessica had helped study for exams during slow afternoon shifts. The construction workers who she always made sure got their coffee fast and hot before they headed to their jobs. Later that afternoon, after William had taken Jessica for a proper lunch at a place where nobody threw coffee on the floor, the videos started hitting social media. By evening, they'd gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. News outlets were picking up the story. Bradley Cunningham's name was trending, and not in a good way. His firm issued an apology by midnight, but the damage was done. 3 major clients pulled their contracts within 24 hours. His partners voted him out by the end of the week. His wife filed for divorce a month later, citing years of similar behavior she'd been too afraid to confront. But this story isn't really about Bradley Cunningham's downfall. It's about Jessica Walsh, who went back to work at the corner bistro the next morning despite her husband's protests and William's offers to set her up in any career she wanted. She went back because she'd learned something important a long time ago. Your worth isn't determined by your job or your bank account or how other people treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself and others, especially when nobody's watching and there's nothing in it for you. Jessica worked at the corner bistro for another 2 years before finally moving on. Not because she had to, but because she was ready. She'd proven what she needed to prove, to herself more than anyone else. And when she left, Ruth cried. The regular customers threw her a party. George gave a speech about how she'd restored his faith in young people. As for that viral video, it's still out there, still getting shared when people need a reminder that karma is real and that treating people with dignity isn't optional, it's just human. And that's how one man's cruelty became a lesson for millions. But here's what I want to know. Have you ever witnessed someone get instant karma like this? Drop your story in the comments below because we read every single one. If this story touched you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, you never know who's watching, who's connected to whom, or what consequences your actions might bring. But more importantly, treat people with respect simply because it's the right thing to do. Subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and karma, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, be kind. You never know whose life you might change, including your own.